Hi Nigel, it's James at Regus Motorsport. We're obviously here down in
Bobby Tracy with Ashton's, and
they've allowed us to carry out the inspection on the car, and they also kindly got their local garage to allow us lift and ramp access. So we're set up, we've brought all of our equipment, our table, printers, laptop, all of our tools, and we are reporting on your, or potentially your E46 M3 convertible. We'll go over the road test and things like that later. It does drive absolutely brilliant. There are a couple of little things which I'll mention, but it drives great. So first thing out of the way is that it is actually a well presented car, and it does drive very nice. The underside is always going to be an area of concern on old cars or older cars, because cars naturally get corrosion. There's bare metal, bare aluminium, bare steel. Things are going to corrode, it just happens. It just depends on what people's level of corrosion is acceptable. So there are some areas on this car that are more corroded than you'd necessarily want or like. We're going to go through those now, starting at the front. So the under tray we've taken off of the car to expose the bottom of the engine so we could have a good look around in that area. When we took that under tray off, which is that component over there, sat on that under tray was this, which is just looks like a bolt, but if you specialise in these cars, you know exactly where that comes from. That is a Vanos gearbox bolt, so that is an internal bolt inside the engine, holding specifically the Vanos gearboxes onto the ends of the camshaft. We've got no idea whether that's a new one or a used one. We cannot say, but we will save it for you if you wanted to have a look, or if Ashton's want to have a look. But that was found on the bottom of the under tray, so somebody's been in the engine and done some work with the Vanos. It may have been great and they've overhauled it or done something, or it may be that it just dropped down off the floor. We don't know exactly the scenario, but we're just letting you know we've found that. There's evidence of paint on the front bumper inner polystyrene carrier. That polystyrene should just be black, but it's painted body colour, so the bumper has been painted after it left the factory. No big deal, because paint is going to have to happen on cars, that's just inevitable. There's well-established corrosion present on all the front suspension components. Now, again, like I said earlier, some people may argue that that's just going to happen, that's normal, but there are some areas that have got more corrosion than you'd want, or maybe you'd expect from the age of the vehicle. So we're going to talk about those and areas on the chassis a bit later on, but just showing you in general the strut, the kingpin, the tie rod, the subframe, the anti-roll bar. There are some good bits of corrosion established in that area. So it may well have been a coastal car. It might have lived up on the coast, had some salt air. It might have seen heavy winters, might have been used all year round in the first few years. It's obviously got low mileage, so it hasn't been used a huge amount, but it has been used probably in salty environments, I'd say. The front brake flexi hoses are starting to crack. Now these are very hard to get to because we're actually working on a 4-post lift. We don't have good access to get to them, but we're very grateful of having the access, full stop. But up in this area, it might not be possible to video, but there are some cracks starting in the front brake flexible hoses, which is quite common where they're moving quite regularly. The front brake discs are lipped. But we would only suggest that they would be changed at the next brake pad change. They're still fine at the moment. The front anti-roll bar is corroded at the mounting points, which is especially these ones here. The signs of engine coolant stain on the lower radiator hose. There's a not wet, it's dry now, but the white powder is coolant, so it has had a coolant leak, but looks to have been dealt with, or it's dry now. There's a fair-sized engine oil leak from the Vanos and the timing chain tensioner area, which needs to be, or would benefit to be looked at. So on the bottom of the air conditioning condenser, compressor, there's oil, which is engine oil, wet oil collecting, and also up in this corner of the timing case there's also a wetness of oil, so there is an engine oil leak present. The air conditioning drive belt is cracked. When we zoom in, you can see lots of little cracks in that air conditioning drive belt, so that should be renewed. The fan cowling is insecure. Now it's missing a bolt in this location here, so the fan cowling can move. Should have a Torx bolt like that one over there, and this one is missing. But that would have had to be taken off, interestingly, to get the Vanos unit off the car. So it's another telltale sign that somebody's been in the engine. Not a bad thing, just, you know, sort of evidence showing you what's gone on. Both front corner under trays are not clipped into the aluminium carriers. These are the under trays, and it should be clipped into this aluminium carrier there and the same with this one here. They're floating at the moment. Both of those, interestingly, are brand new, or not brand new, but very new. They're good, fresh plastic. The engine constant pressure valve is leaking engine oil. Not a massive leak because it's dry down here, but then when we zoom up you can see there's an oil patch up there on the back of the engine block. So it's not made its way down to the bottom of the engine yet, but that is coming from the constant pressure valve, which will want to be changed at some stage in the future. Not immediately, but at some stage. There's an e-box bolt stuck in the left chassis leg. We've seen this quite a few times. So the chassis leg here is the left hand side box section, and up in there is a screw just sat inside, and that is one for the e-box, which is in the engine bay. So somebody's taken that out of the e-box and dropped it, and it's landed in the chassis leg, and it's now stuck in the chassis leg. So it may cause a rattle, probably not, and you might be able to fish that out with compressed air or a magnet or something like that. Exhaust downpipe flange has a hairline crack. Now, that's only a small one, very small. Just here, it's just been over tightened, and there's a hairline fracture in the exhaust downpipe joint just there, which is part of the manifold. It's not actually blowing yet, but eventually they can cause a blowing issue at that area there. We've seen that before. Offside front wheel arch liner has a missing 8mm fixing, which is, just trying to find it. Oh yeah, just here, just in that location just there. There's a whole fixing missing. Both front wheel arch liners are damaged by a large trolley jack. So near the jack-in point of the car, which is here, it looks like a large trolley jack is sort of pressed and damaged the plastic undertray because it's dented in a circular shape. And the same with the right hand side. There's the jack-in pad, but this part of the plastic of the undertray is damaged as well. Only slightly deformed. Then the gearbox drain plug has an oil mist. That is only sort of sweating oil. It's not actually leaking oil, but there is an oil mist. It should be like an aluminium colour, and obviously you can see it's a sort of a dirtier dirt that's collected in the oil mist on the bottom of the gearbox. Very slight deformation to left and right underside chassis floors, and that's probably due to poor jacking. That's only very minor, and it's very hard to see because, again, we're working on a 4-post lift, so we've not got complete access directly under there. But there's a slight dent in the chassis or the floor pan just about there where it's probably been jacked up incorrectly. And there's another little one just there, little crease in the floor. Nothing major. It's not actually split the seam sealer, I don't think. Maybe that one has, but it's not actually corroding. There doesn't seem to be any corrosion on it. So there's that, and now we're just going to move to another list. Then the exhaust centre nuts and bolts are corroded beyond their original size. They should be 13mm hex nuts, and they've just sort of crumbled away to nothing. The front and rear metal brake pipes are corroded at the centre mounting points. In there, there's corrosion, which, in our opinion, when you take these brake pipes apart or actually just move them, that splits because it's such a weakness to a little small brake pipe. Offside rear aquaplane guard and side skirt is loose and missing the fixings. That's this piece here. There's 2 rivets missing in the side skirt, and the aquaplane guard is fitted incorrectly, so it's loose. The diff input has an oil mist. It's only a slight mist, it's not actually really a leak yet, but whereas the corrosion would be quite sort of fresh and sort of bright, like this sort of colour, you can see there's an oil stain here around the diff, but it isn't actually dropping. So it may be an old leak that's been cleaned up. You can see there's the other leak where it gets to there on the V-brace. So it could have been an old leak, it may have had a diff seal already done, possibly. Centre exhaust heat shield is missing a fixing at the offside rear undertray point, that one there. The near side rear aquaplane guard is also loose and missing some fixings. Missing a fixing there, and I think there's also a missing fixing I noticed at the side skirt joint. Yeah, that one there is missing as well. The rear trailing arm bushes are showing signs of age, but they are still serviceable. These are very hard to video because we're on a 4-post lift, but we can see cracks in the rubber of the rear trailing arm bushes just up in there, but they are still serviceable. They haven't separated yet. Front to rear metal brake pipes are corroded at the rear axle location. So those ones have got markings, corrosion on them. They've also been noted on the MOT, which was yesterday as well. So they will start to become an MOT advisory regularly, and eventually they may well become a failure one day, possibly. Rear anti-roll bar drop link rubbers are cracked, which are these little ones just in here. Got some cracks on them present. Then we've got rear xenon drop link is level sensor is likely seized. That's this thing here. So there's lots of corrosion on that ball and socket joint, so it means that this isn't articulating. It should be able to be twisted in any location, and also there's a bend to it and it should be quite vertical. I would say the corrosion is enough where it's grabbed the plastic socket in that position and it just now won't move anymore. That's why we're saying it's likely seized. Rear subframe bushes are starting to separate. Very small degradation on the outside edges, so some separation happening from the rubber to the aluminium that it once was bonded to. Signs of ABS sensor to ABS ring contact on both drive shafts. Again, we're on a 4-post lift, so it's a bit harder to show you, but these, if I zoom in, these are ABS reluctor rings on the end of the drive shaft, and now we can't spin it because the wheel and the weight of the car is sitting down on the 4-post lift, but those little black lines are basically blocks where they've been contacting the ABS sensor. They shouldn't be contacted, and therefore they shouldn't be black. They should just be a normal sort of rust colour. There you go, the ones on the very left you can see aren't black and they're not contacted, and then there must be enough corrosion under that it's expanded and it's come into contact with the ABS sensor, which has made it go sort of a shiny colour, which in this light is showing as black. So there are no ABS lights on that I remember at the moment, but if you do in the future get an ABS light on, that would be an area of sort of inspection first of all. If you look at this one over here, there's not the same sort of markings. There's 3 there that are visible, but the one on the right, the 2 on the right aren't visible. So there's a point of contact in that one as well. Then we've got the exhaust CV joint heat shield is insecure, which is this item here. I can lift it up quite easily. So there's some fixings that have broken or missing, I suppose. Yeah, the right rear fixing is missing. This one over here, it's broken off. The rear exhaust silencer center right exhaust tip rivet is not fitted correctly. That's that one just here. So it's stuck in there and it's snapped, but obviously it stands out like a sore thumb because it's poking out, hanging out. It may well have had tips changed or somebody's taken them off to polish them, but they do look very clean. I'd say they probably are new tips. And that one's poking out as well. Evidence of paint on carbon rear bumper carrier, similar to the front area. I'm just trying to remember where I found it. 1 second. I've forgotten where I found it now, but there was there we go, a purple hue in the background, which I think is paint overspray on the rear carbon canister. But again, that's going to happen because it's obviously a car which is used, so it's going to have to have had paint at some stage, probably anyway. The rear exhaust clamp is cracked, so there's some rear clamps on the M3 on holding the rear silencer to the centre silencer. These are quite common. They commonly can break. Just see if we can find a better angle to show you a picture at. And it's the outer one on the left inner has got a outer one left front has got a crack in it. But it's all gas tight, so there's nothing really to stress and worry about at the moment. That's perfectly fine. It's just in time it will need some new clamps on there. And then there's a note just basically that well-established corrosion present on all rear suspension components. Now, I was hoping that we wouldn't really have to report too much on corrosion because obviously it's a late model car and it's low mileage, but I'm afraid it is suffering with corrosion. And I feel bad using the word well-established, but in certain areas that is quite established. I mean, if you plan not to drive the car much and it is just an investment that's going to be parked up, it won't really get too bad or too much worse. But naturally, if you do want to drive the car, then it is going to experience atmosphere, waters and salts and things like that are out there and may continue to corrode. So naturally all these things can be changed, renewed, powder coated, but some things can't, like the shock absorbers. They would have to be renewed if it concerns you. At the moment it's not structurally causing any problems, it's just a visual problem. And we know as well as anybody that used cars are going to have corrosion on them. It's just down to somebody's level of understanding if they are happy with that type of corrosion, if it's normal, if they would assume that is normal corrosion, which in our opinion as a specialist we see these cars all day long, and I would sometimes expect this sort of corrosion on like an O2 car with a lot more miles on it. So if I was being totally honest, it has got more corrosion on it than you'd want or like. It's not a deal breaker, but it's just whether you sort of bear that in mind, you know, be prepared that you may need to change things in the future, because some corrosion is going to be causing problems with camber adjustment bolts there, for example. There's no way they'll turn, they'll just spin because they'll be seized inside the ball joint. We know this because we get it regularly on a weekly basis. Things like these socket cap bolts here, which take an Allen key fix in to get the anti-roll bar off, they just round out, so they'll need to be renewed if you need work done on it in the future, that's all. Just giving it an honest appraisal from somebody that obviously sees these on literally a daily basis. We know we've got eight on site at the moment, E46 M3s. Regardless of all the other Empire cars, we've got 8 of these with us at Reedish Motorsport at the moment. That's the underside report in general. It's not a huge list. It might sound like a list, but there wasn't a huge amount of things that needed immediate work there, was there? There was some things to consider, some things just to note down. Some of these things will go, you know, at the end of the day, it just passed an MOT, so it's perfectly safe, it's perfectly fine. It's just giving you a purist's opinion and giving you an opinion of if you changed all those things on that list, then you would get the car very close to an original spec. But it does drive very, very well. I wouldn't let these lists put you off as such, because it is an excellent car. It's well presented and it does really, really drive nice. I've driven it on I think about a 9-mile road test with Steve now, and I was very impressed. So that's the underside reporting video. We're now going to move on to some of the other areas that we've been inspecting for you. Hi Nigel, it's James at Reedish Motorsport, and we're going to start the video for the rear axle carrier panel check and report. So that's where we look at the RACP and see if there are any problems, any cracks, any spot welds. As you know, these E46s just do suffer with that. So the RACP is a very large panel at the back underside of the chassis, which goes from the left rear shock absorber all the way to the right rear shock absorber. It's spot welded to that boot curve there, and it goes up to the fuel tank area where the rear seat panels are hidden by that under tray section. Massive panel, and all the components for the rear axle bolt into it. And it can suffer with stress cracks, sometimes spot welds breaks. So a spot weld is something like this little small 6mm circle, which is holding 2 bits of metal together. Sometimes they can break, they can get cracks around them, which sometimes are full circle or partially circled. And then when spot welds break, the metals actually try to separate, and then when you get fatigue on a metal panel, it eventually does crack and give you a line or a splot. One of the most common places you can find that is next to this left rear mount, specifically in this area just here. So first of all, we're going to clean some of this road grime off, and then have a look at the underside, especially in that area, in a bit more detail. So you'll be pleased to hear that on initial inspection it does look like it's crack free underneath the car. I've cleaned a section of dirt off, and I've had a very close look at this section here, which is where they can commonly crack, just where the horizontal part of the rear axle carrier panel takes a small turn and comes down this way. Right about there you would normally see cracks, and can see cracks. The later cars are very good. After October 04 build date, there was a plastic brace installed inside the rear axle carrier panel to make that hollow section a solid section, and therefore try to stop it cracking. That does seem to work on the late cars, which is why we're not seeing anything obvious in that area on your car. It doesn't mean that they can't crack in other locations. Some of the stresses then still do get passed through the panel. For example, sometimes you can get stress cracks on this side, which is the right rear. I'll clean that one off and have a look in a minute. All in all, generally it does look good. Even spot welds are actually very good. Up on this left side panel, near where the shock absorber is, there's a couple of spot welds that commonly can crack up there, which is like the early signs of the left rear corner starting to move, but they're all good, all clear. No corrosion, no circles, no lines, anything to say there's moving. I'm just going to put the torch in, see if we can get the camera into a location to give you a better idea. 1 second. So this would be the area, just going to get a torch on the subject. Yeah, this would be the area looking at the back of it, and that is clear no crack in that location. It doesn't mean the whole panel is perfect. We still need to go and have a look inside the car, but the areas that I've checked underneath the car I'm happy with. So that's the front mounting points that I can get to and see currently being away from the workshop, but the corner sections up here can sometimes split on this side. The right hand side mount, I'm going to double check one more time in a minute. The left hand side's clear. The roof section up here, where there's two spot welds which hold the rear axle carrier panel to the boot floor panel inside the car and the left rear chassis leg inside the car, they look good. They don't show any signs of breakage. And on a convertible we've got a welded bulkhead which goes straight across the middle of the rear axle carrier panel. Where that blue pipe is, it goes all the way across the middle to give it some more strength and actually stabilise the convertible chassis and the bulkhead a little bit better. Sometimes you can get cracks breaking around those MIG welds, and I can't see anything developing around those locations all the way across the right, so that's also another good thing as well. So if I find anything on this right rear mount and when I clean it in a minute, I'll update the video. I'm not expecting to, so I probably won't need to report on that area once I've cleaned it. What we're going to do next is go inside the car, have a look at spot welds, specifically this one, inside the boot, because we can see the bottom of it, but there's another side to it, which is the top. You can only get to that inside the car, and not even just by looking inside the car. We need to then go put a borescope camera inside to see if there's any MIG welds that have cracked or any spot welds that have broken on the top section of this rear axle carrier panel. So we're now in the boot of the car inspecting the rear axle carrier panel rear pair of internal mounts. That's where we take out the carpet for the boot floor section and take out the standard BMW grommets that are fitted in various holes in the chassis, which is quite convenient because that's where we are able to check by putting our borescope camera through. This is the borescope camera going through a hole and giving us a live picture what's inside. Specifically, we checked the right hand side, that is all clear, and on the left hand side we're specifically looking for two areas of concern. One spot weld up in the top here, which is just come into view now, which is this one here. This sometimes cracks, but this one's okay. There's no great problems with that one. It's the same colour all the way around. Yeah, that's happy. There's not a crack, there's no rust. That one's okay. And then going through the bottom hole just down here, there's a panel edge, which is where the rear axle carrier panel meets the cavity cover panel, and the line here is spot welded so that the two metals can meet. There's a spot weld just there. That one can sometimes suffer with cracks, but that one is all clear. Happy with that. And then the one next to it can sometimes also suffer with cracks. Now that one is the right rear, just inside that sort of wax puddle. There's a little bit of a black on the corner, but I don't think personally there's a crack there. I think that one is all clear as well and all good, which is excellent because that means the rear axle carrier panel rear internal pair of threaded mounts and their spot welds and MIG welds have all been checked and also all given the all clear. So now we're drilling behind the back seat area, which is going to get us into the seat cavity. There we go, so it's just a small little piece which has gone inside. We'll get the magnet to pick that bit out, and then we'll put a fast drying primer over that bare metal area to make sure there's nothing there, and then we'll put a 20mm BMW grommet in there later on once we've finished our inspections to make sure the cavity's closed off again. So we're in the back of the car now. We've got the laptop set up with the borescope camera, which is this camera on a flexible wand, and as we move it, it gives us a live picture inside the car. And what we're looking at is the two MIG welds that are holding the threaded receivers of the rear axle carrier panel to the cavity cover panel, and due to panel movement and fatigue, sometimes cracks appear down the side of these MIG welds and eventually start going across the MIG welds and actually travelling out into this panel towards the front of the car this way and towards the back of the car that way. So far this one looks very good from what we can see. This one over here looks like it might have a little black line at the edge of it, which is sometimes a marking to say that there is an early sort of panel movement, that little black line up there, but I can't definitely say whether there's a crack or not. So I'd say this side is fairly good at the moment. We're going to then move over to the right hand side, which is this one over here, and have a look, see if there's anything behind the driver's one. So we're now in the right hand side, as you can see, going through this hole and then through our hole that we've made, shining the light with the borescope camera and looking at the two MIG welds one here and one there, and really good news is that they look completely clear, and no black lines around them, no rust lines, no crack lines. The picture's a little bit overexposed, but I'm quite happy to give that the all clear. That is very rare. In all of 2009 there was only 2 cars that we inspected that had the all clear underside and internally, out of probably something like 60 plus cars that we inspected. So that's really good. Quite rare, but a really good thing for this vehicle, and hopefully for the inspection in general, because that was one of the big concern areas on the car, and everybody has an issue, could have an issue, knows E46s can have issues, so that being given the all clear could really help sort of seal the deal, so to speak, because you don't really get much better than that. That is excellent to see. Right, so the next item up is corrosion points to consider. Now we've already talked about corrosion points on the oh, I forgot to write it. 1 second. We've already talked about corrosion points on the axle hardware, the items that you can simply buy new ones of, or you can unbolt, powder coat, refurbish and put back. But now what we're going to talk about is corrosion points on the chassis. Arguably this is one of the most important areas, because the chassis you simply cannot change. It's part of the car, it's not easy to solve corrosion on, and that's why we have to do a report on it. This isn't just something we're picking on this car, we do this on every single car where we carry out one of these reports. So this is the battery box area, and there is well established corrosion on the battery box and also the battery box bracket. It's hard to get a perspective on the video, but so much so that the seam sealer has been pushed open here, where we do, from experience, normally find holes that develop. When you actually tackle this corrosion, you can easily find developed holes, and I think there is a possibility that you could have something developing under that area there, because the seam sealer is very thick and fat with corrosion that's growing and bursting underneath it. The rear wheel arch internal 20mm grommets are likely to be corroded once moved. Now we don't ever take those out, because they are they can disturb paint, they're up in the wheel arches, and it's an area where the cavity wax goes in. But commonly when we do rear axle carrier panel work or corrosion work or restoration work, when we take those grommets out in the inside of the wheel arch, we do find corrosion, and with the corrosion that's present on this car, I think those ones will also be corroded. The rear spring perches are corroded. Now that is up on the tops of the springs. Now I can't get my arm or the camera in there, because we are on a 4-post lift, but whereas we're used to working on a 2-post lift. But take my word for it, in there where the centre of the spring locates on the perches, there are some corroded areas on the chassis to consider. The rear shock turrets are corroded. That also might be a problem to show you, because we're used to having the car on a 2-post where the wheels drop down, which gives us massive gap to get our cameras and view the shock turrets. We can see they are there, I just can't get the camera in there to show you, but again they are on the report, because we can see there's small amounts of corrosion on there. The rear fuel tank strap brackets and the brake pipe brackets are corroded. Now these ones have got quite a bit of corrosion on them. Again, that's a mounting bracket, quite a thin bit of metal that's holding the weight of the fuel tank, or the right hand side of the fuel tank, and then the brake pipe bracket is also quite established corrosion on there. Those ones wouldn't simply be able to be, right, say going forward you wanted us to do some work on the car, or you wanted us to take care of corrosion, they wouldn't be able to be just simply wire wheeled. We'd need to take those brackets off, drill the spot ones out, send them away for aqua blasting, and then re-weld them to the chassis, because they've got a fair bit of corrosion on them. To give you an idea what they should look like, the left-hand side one's a lot better, much more what I'd expect for the mileage of the car. You know, some corrosion on the edges of it, but in general the corrosion is quite small, whereas the right-hand side one's really suffering quite badly. The rear trailing arm pockets are corroded, so that's up this location up there on the chassis where that console bolts in. The front tank strap brackets are corroded. That again is quite hard to show you, but it's these ones up here, and also all the forward fuel tank mounting area is also, when we put our camera and torches up there, we can see that a lot of those panel edges up in that area are corroding and like leaking, seeping down onto the edge of the start of the floor panel section. Let's get this camera working. There we go. It's breaking through. Its corrosion is breaking through the seam sealer there, and also there where there's some chipped sections missing. The rear jacking points and the V-brace mounting boxes are corroded. Now on first inspection that doesn't look too large, but we're not talking about the corrosion here. This is a V-brace which you can just buy a new one of if you wanted to. We're talking about this, which is, to most people it isn't a matter, it passed the MOT and it's just a bit of surface corrosion, but the rule of thumb we honestly find with corrosion is that's about 10% what you can see. When you actually start delving and taking that seam sealer off, you will be amazed how far it is travelling around this jacking point and this V-brace mounting box. They're prolific on an E46 and unfortunately this one is suffering with it as well. So it may only be coloration, but what that is corrosion growing underneath the seam sealer. It's not attacking it from the outside going into the seam sealer, it's been growing underneath the seam sealer for years and it's now starting to spread to a point where it's going to eventually burst open and start showing its real steel bare metal corrosion area. The centre 20mm grommet holes are corroded. That's this one just here, which is got a little bit of seam sealer missing on there, and there's corrosion around the left hand side, and the right hand side one is that one there. And we mention these because they only look very small, but when you actually try to attack that with a wire wheel mechanism or tool to remove that corrosion, it's very weak around that hole, and quite often the hole becomes out of round, so it means that a grommet can't go back in, and therefore sometimes you even need to cut a little bit out. Not essentially definitely going to happen in your case, but it's possible. The offside central chassis leg is corroded. Now this chassis leg here is quite a good telltale sign of the general condition of the car, because traditionally you don't get much corrosion on these chassis legs. They're normally like this here, but there are fair amounts of corrosion which is sort of established, not just on the top of the chassis leg flange, but actually behind that as well, which is probably going to be growing on the floor pan. Now it does look small, doesn't it, and it looks like we're being really picky, but we just have to be honest, this is what we find, and this is not the end of the world, but also not ideal for the age and the mileage of the car. That's things that you may want to consider, especially if you were going to plan to keep it as an investment, or maybe try and sell at a higher price later on in years to come. If somebody has an inspection done on the vehicle, they are obviously going to know about these things, and or even if you wanted us to do any sort of underside refresh on the car, for example, those sort of things have to be taken into account, because you simply cannot paint over this area. That corrosion has to be tackled, removed and treated before any sort of paint and resealing process can happen to actually eradicate it and stop it coming back. And we're not saying don't buy the car, we're just saying be aware of these areas. They may cost some amount of labour, some token amounts of labour to do something about if it bothers you. You may have no interest in doing the underside, and you may just love the look of the car and the drive of the car and how it's presented outside. That we know that this is probably going to last another 5-8 years without even giving MOT issues, but it's, the purist in us tells us that most customers would want to know about corrosion considerations. The offside front jacking point is starting to corrode. Unfortunately, I can't also get the camera into that location, but around the outside area of that jacking pad, there is some corrosion starting. Oh yeah, you can see a little bit with it just up here. And then lastly, on the corrosion, the front subframe mounting points are starting to corrode. So that's on the chassis leg. There's some small bits. These are really small though, and they're surface. Those can easily be tackled. If I'm honest, they won't even really cause you any problems or give you anything really to worry about. So hopefully that gives you an indication of corrosion points on the chassis for consideration. So now we're just going to talk about the paint in general. Now, we're not specialists in paint. We're obviously, as you know, much more mechanical, and we're not detailers, so that's not our speciality, but we can obviously point out and spot obvious things, especially when we got the car at this level. Now the car presents
really well. It does look absolutely fantastic in this velvet blue, and so do the wheels as well. But there are
just a couple of things to note. Nothing really that I don't think is a deal breaker, just things to be mindful of. So there is body colour overspray inside the wheel arch, which these cars don't have, so that tells us that the rear quarter panels have been painted, and it wasn't fully masked inside. That's a telltale sign that it's had paint. Like I said before and during the video elsewhere, it doesn't matter that a car's had paint, it's to be expected. I don't think really you're going to find an E46 M3 that hasn't had paint, but both sides have got overspray in the rear arches, but they have taken that grommet out because there's a black grommet which would have got painted, so somebody has definitely done some considerate sort of work whilst doing their painting. There is body coloured paint overspray on the fuel flap locking grommet, so that is just something that wasn't quite masked up. So that little piece there should be a black grommet, much like this black rubber here. And this has been painted over, so that wasn't taken out or wasn't masked up. Now, also, I think it could be, we'll check on this in a minute, but normally you can see the push rod of the locking mechanism poking out there or level with it. And now I think that might be either retracted and stuck in the boot, or maybe not there present at all. And it locks into this piece just here when the central locking is activated. We'll check on that, and if it's an issue, we'll put that into the video as well later on. Then looking at the alloy wheels, now these are great, and these are original. This is the original polished finish which all BMW M3s had on the 19s. You can see they got swirl marks on them where they've been washed, and there's lots of small little micro scratches, but nothing really that you notice from a distance. When you look at them, they look outstanding. So most of them are original. Three of them are. One of them has been refurbished. Again, not the end of the world, because it's better to have a refurbished one than a curbed one, for example. But this near side front one here may have been recently done, it might have been 2 years ago, we don't know, but you can see it's a different process. This is what we call diamond cutting, because you can see all the radius lines going through it, which is where it's been on a lathe, and a diamond cutting tip has come along and cut a profile, actually just taken a section off the front. That is the most, 99% of people that have real refurbs have to have that way, because it's a known process. But the rest of them are original, and also are polished, which is a slightly different effect. When you actually look closely, you can see the difference. There is corrosion starting on the near side front wing. Now this is a shame. This is something that E46s are known for, front wings. There is corrosion starting just there, starting to come through. It hasn't broke through the paint yet, but it is starting to creep round because it's on the inside edge. There's also a couple of small little points and markings in the paint which are showing that there's corrosion just starting to come round. That one is obviously one of the most obvious ones. Then we've got on the offside front, this isn't an exhaustive collection of paint. I mean, this, like I say, we're not a specialist, we are in the paint area, we're just giving you some obvious notes that we remark on. So on the offside front wing, there is a bird strike stain above the grille. See if I can get the it's harder to see. Right, it might be impossible to bring it out on the. It's basically this area here. There's a staining, and there you go. You can see the dribble there, where the bird muck is dribbled down the wing, and there's a larger sort of puddle collection, impact strike, where the bird mess is stained. So this is obviously very good paint, and you can see the torch isn't affected. And this up here, you can see the torch light is now rippled, and that's because there's a stain which is eaten into the clear coat. It may be able to come out with a detailer or somebody that's got very clever knowledge on that sort of thing to be able to take it out. And then the last thing is this area here, which is the B pillar, we would call this, where the door join opens. This is the B pillar, and at the lower edge, where this car, or certainly the rear half of the car, has been painted, there is a large collection of clear coat, which isn't actually a run, because a run would just be a single dribble. It's actually a full collection sag of lacquer, which is, there's the edge of it just there where the torch light changes. You know, the torch is perfect there, and then it just goes into a crease. Now that's not a dent, that's a massive collection of clear coat, which is basically dribbled where too much lacquer is on it, and it's just basically sagged during the drying process, and quite a bit along this section as well. So there's a large clear coat lacquer sag in this area here. The rest of it is in good order. Like I say, it does really present very well. I love the colour, the velvet blue. The individual colour works really well for an E46, and especially well with champagne interior as well. So it's one of a kind. You aren't going to find many like this. Looking at the chassis numbers, interestingly, this is PM 97990, and we've actually worked on 97991. So the next car that was produced after this one on the production line, we've had in our workshop. It was also an 06 E46 M3 convertible with champagne, so it was almost an identical pair. We've had that one. That was a car that was in Wales, Mr. James, and we've looked at our records and we knew that car. So there you go. That was 2016. This one we've never seen before, but it is rare. I think it's only the second car we've seen in velvet blue as a convertible with champagne. So it is very, very rare indeed. And in general, it really does look very, very nice. And on the last item on the paint report is the passenger side door handle. It's a plastic handle mechanism, and on the very corner outer you can see there's quite a noticeable scuff mark which has gone through the lacquer, through the paint, and is actually present on the plastic. I'm pretty sure you can buy these pieces from BMW on their own. It may be able to be filled, but really that would obviously be sensible to consider because it does sort of stand out now. And one more area on the paint that I've noticed now, we're stood inside the car just about to work on the RACP. On the boot lid, looking back, you can see the raised sort of pickup in the light around this area here. There's actually corrosion starting on the boot lid, which is in a non-standard location. There's some pickling in the paint just here. Compare it to how perfect the paint is over here, for example. There's some corrosion starting. It's not actually a rust colour and it's not broken through the paint, but it's just starting underneath. There's also some just here, and you can feel the roughness to it. You can clearly see it and also feel the roughness, and that's probably due to the boot lid opening very close to the convertible top compartment flap. And sometimes when the convertible top compartment flap opens, it hinges itself extremely close to the boot lid, and it may well have come into contact over the lifetime of the car and just caused a corrosion risk or point. It may have had some paint after around that area, but there is some small corrosion on the boot lid just to concern yourself with. It must be small and narrow, because when we were looking at the car from the outside looking in, we didn't spot that. So it's only when we're sort of stood in the car looking backwards that we've noticed it reflect against the light. So the next items are in the engine bay. It's only a few and nothing at all to worry about. The Vanos outer bolts are non-genuine, these ones here. These are just normal socket caps, 12.9 by the looks of it, but they're not the original BMW ones. That confirms our thoughts that the Vanos
has been overhauled or certainly taken apart, because we found on the video previously, on the bottom of the under tray,
we found the Vanos
bolt, one of the inner bolts sat on the under tray. So yes, it's definitely had Vanos work before.
To what extent we don't know, but maybe the invoices or paperwork might say.
It's one thing I haven't
and then, sorry, on the fan cowl, the rivet head is missing. Just on this rivet, this plastic rivet here, there's a rivet head just missing. No big deal, simply it could be put back on. The exhaust heat shield is bent over, which is this one on the left. It's got a bend and a kink to it. That could easily be straightened up and sat back correctly. That should be sat on top of this heat shield to stop any exhaust heat radiating up into the engine bay. Not sure why it's bent like that, but it is, so that one needs to be realigned. There's signs of bonnet removal, which isn't really a bad thing. It may have just been off for some paint or freshened up, but these bolts, you can see that the paint has been chipped off where a socket has been undone. On the factory, paint is now chipped, so it definitely had, and you can see the lineup difference, so the bonnet has been off before. The radiator vent hose is not clipped in, or the clipping points aren't clipped into the front panel, so that's that one there and that one there. That one needs clipping in there, and that one needs bringing along to be clipped into that location there. And then there's a replacement E-box bolt that has been fitted. So this is the E-box, and it's got these Torx bolts here which secure the lid down, and we found one of those stuck in the chassis leg underneath the car, and that would normally mean that one of them would be missing, but they're all present, so it means that whoever dropped one was good enough to go and buy the correct one from BMW, and they have installed it, so good for them. That's the rest. That's the completed engine bay report. There is really nothing to do or nothing to worry about in that area that we can see at the moment. They're just sort of advisory notes. So we're now just doing diagnostic because when we drove the car, straight away at the car park out of ARG, gear selection would flash. It would not select a gear smoothly. That's the wrong way to describe it. It wouldn't select the gear and give you a solid 1 or 2. It would just constantly flash, telling you as if like a gear, like a door or a bonnet is open or something like that. Then later on when we came out of the the petrol station, the SMG cog light came on. Now we've got back and it was on the whole journey. We've done about 8 or 9 miles, but the gearbox was fine. It didn't actually cause any problems. Interestingly, it drove very, very well in manual auto mode, and it was good. But the SMG cog light has gone out. Now we've restarted the car, so we're doing a diagnostic diagnostic test. Also during the entire drive, the tyre pressure light is on. That's no big deal. It should just, can't guarantee it, but it should just be a tyre inflation issue that needs balancing and then the system hard resetting. So here's the SMG report with the time and the date, and we've got 2 faults in there. One for voltage supply, which means that it was just low voltage. Maybe it got a low battery, flat battery, or it was jump started or something. That's no problem. And then the next one down is this one here, error code 52, bonnet switch evaluation while standstill. That's likely to be the reason why it was flashing, because it was, the flash normally tells you that either a door's open or a bonnet's open. I checked that the boot, the doors and the bonnet were all shut, and I slammed the bonnet again, but it obviously there's an issue with the pin. So there's 2 locating tabs on the bonnet, which are micro switches inside the bonnet catch, and that one's already, you can't even see that one, so that's probably what it is. You can see that one there, there's the micro switch which the plunger presses. That one you can't even see, so that's what it is. So nothing major. The car does drive, but it is going to want a bonnet catch on the right hand side, unless somebody can work out where the micro switch is and maybe fish it out and lever it up or something. But yeah, it's the right hand side bonnet catch which is needed. We can delete these codes, but I'm pretty sure it's going to come back because it looks like the micro switch arm is completely missing. So these are the bonnet strikers which press down, and these have definitely been painted or even taken off the car before, because they get rusty quite quickly, and you can see the rust is coming through. This silver paint isn't normal. That's like a hammerite or something that somebody's done. So somebody may have taken this off. It looks like this has got the same silver paint, so I'd expect this has been taken off. That looks like a new bolt, and maybe when somebody took this off, they damaged the micro switch, which I think is right down in the middle, stuck down there, whereas this one is in the correct position. So I think somebody's just been playing about. They've tried to improve the looks of it by painting it, but in doing so, they've damaged the micro switch. So now we're on to the interior, which is extremely good with the champagne leather. It looks really good against the velvet blue. The offside door card is not fully fitted, which is easily overcome, but down this side there's a gap showing that the door card's not flush against the door, and also the offside door locking pin is missing. There's an indicator here, should be that the lock pops up or down when you lock the car. Also on the passenger side, underneath the passenger seat, there is a first aid kit, which naturally is out of date. It was dated 2011 that it expired, so that could do with renewing. The near side door card has 2 yellow marks on the champagne leather just by the door handle underneath here, which I'm sure will easily clean out on the stitching. Just some little areas that could do with improved cleaning. The sat-nav screen has small scratches on it, just where it's been cleaned over the years, I'd imagine. There's signs of levering on the near side door handle mirror blank. Just down here there's some deformation, and also up here with a little scratch, so it shows that this blank has been taken off to get to the bolt to remove the handles. So either the handles have been removed, replaced, repainted, or maybe the door card's been off. It's nothing major, but there are some markings around that trim piece there. The centre console has some light scratches at the handbrake console area, just in front of that handbrake on this plastic trim here. These really do scratch very easily done with the nail. It's nothing serious, but just some abrasion marks just in that area there. The Titan Shadow near side dash trim has a bubble. It's got 2 actually, just in the trim work there. The Titan Shadow centre SMG trim also has a bubble. which is just noticed behind the severity button. There's a few bubbles just appearing in that center trim. There's on the right hand side, on the internal A-pillar trim, which is actually like a felt sort of trim, there are 3 marks, one there, and one there. Not sure what they are. Sometimes you get cigarette ash if somebody was smoking, marking that trim there, which could be replaced maybe or improved upon if it was to be bothering somebody. And then the last thing is that we've noticed that there's a non-oval interior rear view mirror fitted. Now most of the M3s, as far as we're aware, always came with the oval mirror. Certainly other convertibles that we've got have that. And this one's got a non-oval. They commonly do leak because they're electrochromatic and the gel leaks out, so it might have been that it was leaking and somebody's just fitted a non-oval one. It does the job perfectly fine. It's even got the LED in the bottom as well, but it's not the sort of oval one which the M3 was known for. Other than that, the interior is in excellent condition, and what we're doing now is just starting to take everything out of the back seat area, the base and the bench, so that we can start the bore scope inspections behind the rear seat panel. Just whilst we're closer looking at the leather, we're obviously taking the base and the backrest out as well, and you can see that there is a marking on the left rear passenger backrest of the champagne leather. It looks originally just like a dirt mark, but it is actually a stain, and you can feel that it's actually causing the leather to be non-flat. Something's either eaten into it or it's raised on top, because you can feel that with it feels like a divot with your finger. So there's something there, and also on the passenger side door card on the Titan's shadow trim, there's also a marking, 2 little scratch marks in the passenger armrest area.